Hello again, and welcome to the Aviation News Talk podcast. I'm Max Trescott, and this is our weekly show dedicated to everything general aviation, such as news and safety tips for pilots and student pilots like you. Today, I've invited Flying Magazine senior editor Rob Mark to give us an update on the Kobe Bryant helicopter crash. Plus, to lighten things up a little, Rob and I will discuss a number of weird aviation stories from the last 2 weeks, and as part of our commentary, we'll pass along some safety tips about them as well. Last week in episode 160, we talked about why pilots will want to fly an electric aircraft and when you'll be able to do that. So if you didn't hear that episode, you may want to check it out at aviationnewstalk.com/160. And if you're new to the show, please click on the subscribe button so that each new episode of Aviation News Talk will be downloaded to your phone as soon as it's released, and of course, it's free. And before we start talking with Rob, I do want to mention Hurricane Laura, which hit the U.S. a few days ago and destroyed hangars and planes at the Lake Charles Regional Airport and the Southland Field airports, both in Louisiana. I hope you and your families were not severely impacted by the hurricane. Here in California, it's been 2 weeks since the massive wildfires began. The two closest fires to me have destroyed over 1,000 structures and are now 50% and 35% contained, with only a few lives lost, for which we're thankful. But unfortunately, over the weekend, there was a plane crash in Illinois in the wee hours of Saturday morning that killed a judge. He had only owned the used Cirrus aircraft for a few days when it crashed at 1:30 a.m. in the morning while flying an approach into his home airport, which was reporting 200-foot vertical visibility and 1/2 mile visibility, which were slightly below the approach minimums. There were a number of risk factors one could identify from reading about that accident, and we'll talk more about it in a future show. In the meantime, I encourage you to practice risk management and avoid taking unnecessary risk when you fly. And now let's get on with the show. I asked Rob to first talk about an article he wrote for Flying Magazine that gives an update on the Kobe Bryant helicopter crash that occurred when the helicopter was flying in marginal VFR conditions and crashed. And for our second segment, here's a little sound effect that Rob recorded for our aviation
stories of the
Rob, of course, is the senior editor at Flying Magazine, and he also publishes the Jetwine blog at jetwine.com. He's worked as both an air traffic controller and as an airline, corporate pilot, and CFI. Rob, thank you for joining us here today.
Hey, thank you for inviting me back, Max. It's always a pleasure to be here on Aviation News Talk. And I'm glad you picked this story about the Kobe Bryant accident, because there have been some developments this past week that some of the listeners may find interesting. There was a lawsuit filed in Los Angeles Superior Court about a week ago by Island Express Helicopters, the charter company that was operating the Sikorsky on behalf of Kobe Bryant. And they sued the controllers, the air traffic controllers from SoCal, over some issues that they thought led to the accident. Now, of course, I guess when you dive into some of the facts that they included in the story, it becomes a bit problematic about, could these incidents have led to the accident, or is this kind of a smoke and mirror show? Of course, it's not for us to discuss, or not for us to decide. But essentially, they're saying that the helicopter pilot contacted SoCal after he left Burbank Tower, headed to the west-northwest, and asked for radar advisories. And the controller said that based on where he thought he was, that he was going to probably not be able to establish radar contact with him anyway, and so he ought to just basically maintain VFR and call Camarillo Tower when he got closer. And the attorneys in this case are saying that the controller had no business denying the pilot's service, and that many of the things that followed led up to the accident. And what we were, for people that may not remember, the helicopter was operating VFR, but he began entering, once he got in the Los Angeles basin, the visibility started getting worse and worse. And eventually he lost ground contact. And so the attorneys are saying, hey, if you'd have been there, to help our pilot, this never would have happened. Again, the controllers kind of thought they were doing kind of an everyday job. And what made the situation just a little more difficult was that after the first SoCal controller denied the service to the pilot, he was relieved on his position by another controller. And since the first controller said, I didn't even establish any radar with this guy, he didn't tell his relief about the helicopter being there. And a few minutes later, the helicopter, still on the frequency, started chatting with the controller again, just like they'd been having a regular conversation, except the pilot, of course, didn't know it was a different controller. And they wasted time trying to establish radio and radar contact again. But the main thing is that the attorneys think that if the controller had given them the service that the pilot asked for in the first place, he would have warned him about his proximity to the nearby terrain long before the pilot lost control of the helicopter.
Boy, so let's unpack this a little bit. It sounds like there are a whole bunch of pieces to it.
Oh, yeah.
Part number one, as I hear you telling the story here, is that the lawyers are saying the helicopter was incorrectly denied flight following, or that they had flight following and they were not handed off properly. I'm not sure exactly which they're saying. Were they ever assigned a squawk code at any time?
No, they never were. In fact, on the initial contact, the controller A, as I referred to him, just said, I'm never going to be able to pick you up where you are, because he was in an area of poor radar coverage. But they did get some paints off the ADS-B, I guess, on the radar. And that was enough for the attorneys to say, well, see, there you go. That should have been enough. And but again, for controllers, they know their areas very well. I mean, they're rated in them just like a pilot is. And they don't need to identify every single aircraft that calls them, because they can say, okay, where you are, you're going to be below my radar coverage, or you're going to be up in the hills, and I'm going to lose you anyway. There's no point in us even going down this road. However, let's be serious. As we all know, the pilot was VFR. He had a responsibility to maintain contact with the ground. And if he began to fly into conditions that were worse than VFR, to me at least, he should have taken some action, but it doesn't sound like he did.
Yeah, I'm looking at what you wrote in Flying Magazine. You said that the suit claims, quote, the denial of service was improper because radar contact had not been lost and services were being denied based on the possibility that it might be lost at some point in the future. You know, it strikes me that ATC is allowed to deny service for any host of reasons. You know, he could have been busy with IFR traffic, and deny a VFR aircraft service is, right there in his rule book says he can do that. And to me, the whole idea of offering service to somebody who you're going to lose any moment now seems pretty reasonable to me.
Well, of course, you're right. The controllers can deny service when they're busy. In this particular case, they found out that the controllers were not really that busy. But the problem is that although the radar may have painted some ADS-B tracks on it, you don't know how closely the track that the controller could have seen, that the attorneys later did, obviously, because they played back the tape. You don't know how accurate the position of that particular aircraft on radar was to where the helicopter really was. Now, again, is it the controller's responsibility to say, I'll never be able to pick you up because you're outside my radar coverage, so contact Camarillo Tower, and by the way, don't hit any of the nearby hills? I mean, it sounds like that warning is something that some people would say, oh yeah, you should have just done it. But it's so completely non-standard to what controllers and pilots understand about their responsibilities.
Yeah, I'm thinking any reasonable pilot who's well informed about how the system would work would realize that based on what was said and the fact they were not given a squawk code, that they absolutely did not have flight following at that point in time.
No, they absolutely did not, and it is a shame that the weather began to deteriorate. But again, there are pictures from ground cameras that showed the helicopter disappearing into the marine layer at one point. So again, it happened quickly, but why did the pilot continue into those conditions? This is a conversation we have all the time about why would I remember us talking sometime back on one of these sessions where somebody took off in a Cirrus in the Rockies at night in bad weather and with passengers, and you'd say, why would you do that? So again, I don't know. If we knew the answer to why people make some of the decisions that they do, maybe we could stem the tide of some of these accidents. But again, we don't know why they do what they do.
Yeah. And I guess I wonder, objectively, would flight following had helped this pilot in this particular case? Sounds like he was skirting close to the clouds and ultimately may have gone into the clouds, or if he went into terrain, clearly he was not maintaining visual separation, or maintaining the required visual contact you need in VFR. So yeah, I'm sure there's perhaps some blame to be allocated in different areas here. But holy cow! I mean, it sounds like what the pilot did was risky to begin with, to be flying in those particular kinds of conditions, and then to continue in them as you lose visual references. Yeah, yeah. Maybe there's some fault on the part of the FAA. Sounds like it's not the majority of the fault.
Well, I think what we also can't forget is that this helicopter is a big helicopter. An S-76 is a big monster, but it did not have ground proximity software aboard, so there was nothing to warn the pilot of upcoming terrain. The only way he would have known was he looking at an iPad, or what was he doing for navigation? Obviously, he was trying to follow Highway 101, but as he started to lose ground contact, who knows? But I think an important part is of this whole case really kind of rests on what we heard there at the end. And this quote came out of the LA Times report on the story. It says, among other items, this filing seeks a declaration that the cross defendants, the two controllers, are obligated to defend and indemnify Island Express. I think the fact that they're trying to kind of shift the responsibility to someone else does say a lot about what's really going on with this story.
Neither of you or I are lawyers and are not qualified to speak from a legal perspective, but my wild guess is that what's happening is what most reasonable lawyers would probably recommend for the helicopter company to do. So it doesn't surprise me that they're filing these suits or making the contentions that they're making. I'm sure they're probably pretty good reasons for doing what they're doing. You and I are looking at it differently as pilots and saying, yeah, but. And of course, if this ever went to a jury, I'm guessing there would be no pilots on the jury, and who knows how it might end up. My wild guess is that this will probably get settled. I don't know. What do you think?
Boy, it's hard to know with a high-profile case like this. There's going to be quite a bit at stake. Unfortunately, people do not like to take responsibility for some situations that they probably need to take responsibility for. And again, I think that's it's going to turn out to be, well, I didn't do it, you did it. Not wasn't me, it was you. It's sad to say, but that is often what happens in these aviation litigation cases, where we've seen aircraft manufacturers sued until recently, sued for things that went on in the design of an aircraft or the operation of an aircraft many years before. And they said, well, if the door latch hadn't been created the way that it was during the crash, the occupants would have been able to get out. And there's nothing in there about, well, what happened to the airplane to cause it to go down in the first place? Well, we're not going to talk about that. We're just going to focus on the fact that we see a loophole here somewhere. It doesn't, and of course, it doesn't mean they're all loopholes. I don't mean that, but there's certainly, to you and I who have been doing this a while, there are certainly some of these cases that look like they have some loopholes in them.
Well, and I'm sure that no case is clean. I think they have found a couple things to hang their hat on here, and my guess is, that it's legitimate to move forward to try and pursue this cause of action. And of course, it goes without saying, these are just our opinions, and this is for entertainment purposes only. We're not lawyers. We don't know.
No, if I were an attorney, I'd be using lawyer talk, whatever that is. And we didn't talk about any lawyer talk. So no, really, this is just two pilots
speculating wildly.
Yeah, and one guy like me who used to be a controller, and I know what it's like when you're sitting in a radar room. And the last thing you want to do is give somebody instructions if you are not certain of where they are. And it's exactly because of this kind of thing. Because if we were to look back later, if they had identified him somehow and tried to give him some service and the guy had run into the hill anyway, they'd be saying, well, if you knew the coverage was bad in that area, why would you try to provide service in that area? So it's,
You raise a really interesting point. Had they offered service and the accident occurred, which to me seems entirely possible, the opposite argument would be made. So you're right. I think people will generally look at what argument favors their side the most. I mean, one thing goes without saying, this is a huge tragedy, and it also goes to show that there continue to be challenges with pilots flying in marginal VFR conditions. And when conditions are marginal, there's no guarantee that they'll stay marginal. They may get worse. So this may have been one of those kinds of cases where, it looked like legally the pilot could meet the visual requirements, but if the weather got worse, then gosh, you rolled the dice and lost. So I really want pilots to kind of realize that when you see one type of weather and it looks like it's good enough, this will probably work out, there are zero guarantees that it's going to stay that good. It may get worse. And when weather is marginal, I'd say there's a 50-50 chance it's going to get worse. It might get better, but it also might get worse.
And that's always what we try to tell students is that, do you want to do this for a flight? And just say, well, I'm sure this is going to work out.
And we should let people know who are listening to the podcast, this was crossing your fingers.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry.
For luck.
People may not have understood that. No, but I mean, it's just a crazy thing. I don't want to fly having that feeling in the pit of my stomach going, something's not right here. I'll just press on because I'm sure it's going to work out. No, I'm sorry. I don't do that. But that's just me.
Well, let's move on. I mean, this is absolutely a tragic story, but we have a lot of other things going on. And of course, in the midst of our pandemic, I thought it might make sense to kind of look at the world of the strange. So we need to do something to kind of lighten things up in these times of the pandemic. So you and I put together a list of stories, and oddly, we didn't have to dig deeply. These are all from just the last 7 to 10 days or so. So why don't you tell us about the first one?
Okay, so an illusionist, for those people that may not know what an illusionist is, us old guys used to call them magicians, and we're not talking about politicians. We're talking about magicians.
You mean like David Copperfield, Amazing Kreskin, folks like that, right?
Exactly. People you never see anymore. But this particular illusionist, David Blaine, is planning on going flying, according to the news story that we're talking about right now. And that's going to happen this next Yes, it'll be this next Monday, August 31st, and he intends to try something that's going to be somewhat remarkable. And for those of you that may be wondering, how much experience does this man have trying things that are remarkable? Well, he held his breath for 17 minutes. It's not that I'm asking how he did it. I'm asking myself, why would you want to hold your breath for 17 minutes? But
well, if you were a little kid and you're angry with mom and dad, I'm going to hold my breath.
Yes, exactly. But we won't get into all the past experience of this man. And but what he plans on doing is taking off under a cluster of hydrogen-filled balloons, kind of like, I love this part, like Lawn Chair Larry from a few decades ago, who I think they found up at altitude somewhere, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think what they found was airliners started reporting that they had seen Lawn Chair Larry go by at 6,000 and then 8,000 and 10,000 feet. Yeah, he was a non-pilot rated gentleman who just thought it would be fun to tie some balloons to a lawn chair and bring along his BB gun when he got tired to come on down. So yeah, he made history. He was pretty famous.
Exactly. Well, in this case, Blaine plans to ascend to an altitude of at least the height of Mount Everest, which is roughly 30,000 feet, and he plans to do it without oxygen, though he is going to have a small bottle of emergency oxygen with him. And once he gets up there, he's going to free fall parachute back to the earth so that he can tell people how cool this was. My only concern is that when you start to pass out from hypoxia, is he going to be cognizant enough to put the emergency oxygen on? But that's just my thought. So that's what this story is about, is he's planning on doing that soon, and we'll see how this works out. That sounds pretty strange to me.
Yeah, I had thought I had read some portion of the story, and I'll have to dig in here. I thought at some point it said that he was going to hold on to the rope attached to the balloons, and then only after he reached up to 29,000 feet, he would then climb back, up to the balloons. That's the part where I was thinking, that can't be. Because, sure, maybe you're strong enough to hold on to them. Are you smart enough and qualified to hold on to them when you're in an oxygen level where you're, the time to unconsciousness may be 3-4 minutes? You get up to 29,000 feet. Time to unconsciousness is really, really, really short.
Well, here's another one. Above 18,000 feet, that's positive control airspace, at least here in the U.S. And but of course, we do not actually know the geographic location where David Blaine is going to do this. But of course, in most parts of the world, positive control airspace can actually begin at 18,000 feet or sometimes lower.
Yep, much lower in some countries.
I'm kind of wondering how he is not going to be in the way of aircraft somewhere. Maybe he'll have a handheld radio and tell the center, hi, it's Blaine, and I'm in a chair holding on to a rope of balloons. And okay, you take it from there, Max.
Well, I'm thinking he may not have enough hands. I found the quote here. They were talking about Lawn Chair Larry, and it says, but Blaine will do it by holding onto a rope, which he'll ascend only after the cluster reach altitude. Sure. So you're going to hang onto a rope with two hands, until you get to 29,000 feet, and then you're going to climb up to where the balloons are and either release them or something like that. Just imagine how cold it is. What do you think the temperature typically is at 29,000 feet?
Well, in the summer, it's a little warmer, depending on where you are in which hemisphere you're in. But still, at 30,000 feet, it's got to be, pretty cold up in the minus 20 or 30 C
exactly.
area.
I agree. That's exactly where it's going to be.
But if he's holding on to the rope and he starts to lose consciousness, won't he end up letting go of the rope? And so then he's going to free fall back to Earth and hopefully perk up in time to pull the chute, right?
Well, that's why these are aviation stories of the weird.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, so I think the key part of this story is that he is an illusionist. I mean, he somehow held his breath for 17 minutes, and we know that's not possible. So I think there are probably going to be a few tricks up his sleeve here, and things won't be exactly the way he's representing them. But I'm sure it will appear that's what's happening.
Wait a minute. You mean it's not possible to hold your breath for 17 minutes? But it's there. I read it on the internet.
Of course.
I think I should tweet this. Oh, boy.
But I will note you didn't read it in the pages of Flying Magazine. So.
Oh, no.
Now, that would have been authoritative if we'd found it there.
No, not if you want to see me get canned.
Well, let's move on to an authoritative story that comes from the pages of Flying Magazine. And I know you're very familiar with this story. It says TSA still finds plenty of loaded weapons. The TSA said in a press release a couple of days ago that this part is not unusual. Officers at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport discovered a loaded .40 caliber Glock pistol with 13 rounds of ammunition in the carry-on bag of a male passenger. On the same day, they discovered a second loaded gun, a 9mm Sig Sauer with 8 rounds. And so far this year, here's where it starts to get interesting. Phoenix agents have confiscated 62 other weapons from carry-on bags, while nationwide, TSA agents have discovered over 1,700 firearms, 84% of which were loaded. And the TSA posts daily figures for the number of weapons it seizes. Okay. Situation normal. I mean, we've seen this day in, day out for many years. However, a USA Today story last week said, despite air traffic numbers still depressed from 2019 rates, airport security is finding guns in passenger carry-on bags at 3 times the rate recorded before the pandemic. Now, that to me is amazing. So air traffic right now is about 50% of what it was a year ago, and yet gun seizures are up 3 times, which means people are carrying them at least 6 times more often than they were, a year ago. So I guess I'm kind of wondering, what do you think that's about? I mean, you and I have talked from time to time when we, chat on the phone about how the pandemic is affecting all of us in different ways. What do you think's going on here? Are people just more forgetful?
I remember writing about stuff like this years and years ago, and I thought it was amazing that people, even small numbers of people, forgot that they had a loaded 38 in their briefcase when they went through airport security. I'm not a gun person. I don't do weapons, and I don't really understand them very well. But somehow I'm just thinking you probably wouldn't forget. Let's see, passport, wallet, keys, pens, pencils, laptop, 38. In this day and age, that people can still bring a loaded weapon on board and say, "Oh, I forgot. I just forgot." And as this story says, 1,700 times so far this year. And again, not just handguns, but loaded handguns.
Right.
Let's even say that perhaps somehow one of these things ended up in the overhead on a flight, and they hit turbulence, and somehow the firearm discharged. And somebody says, "Oh, I forgot I had that thing up there." I do not, for the life of me, understand what people are thinking about. But I think maybe to your point, I don't think they're thinking at all.
I totally get that people forget and bring firearms on the airplane with them, and I can see lots of reasons why that would be the case. And I don't have a problem with saying, yeah, that's the way it is in this country. What I don't understand is, why is this happening 6 times more often, this year?
Wait a minute,
and it's got to be related to COVID.
Wait a minute. So you can understand somebody bringing a handgun in their carry-on and forgetting about it. I could
absolutely
on that. You have got to tell me how you make that case.
I mean, I'm pretty forgetful. So But think about it this way. I mean, things that are a part of our everyday life, yeah, it's easy to forget about. And if you were used to carrying a handgun around all the time as part of your everyday life, I honestly can understand why somebody would forget. What I don't understand is why they're forgetting 6 times more frequently now during the pandemic.
I think we've talked about this too. And in this pandemic, I think everybody in every industry has noticed that people are more forgetful. Not necessarily huge issues, but what seem to be minor issues, and it seems to be happening to everybody, because I don't believe that you can live in the world that we live in, where people are dying, people are getting sick, people are trying their best to stay healthy, and they're worried about, did I touch something that has germs on it that's going to make, all those things. Because we all know you can't really multitask. Your brain can only absorb so many things at one time. And I think that this has become a huge distraction to us, not to mention what's happened to the economy because of the pandemic.
Yes. And for example, when I look at airplane accidents, to me, it looks like the number of kind of proficiency related accidents is way up. People who are, making bad landings or forgetting to put the landing gear down and things like that. So yeah, I think this story is just symptomatic of a bigger issue, and that we as pilots really need to redouble our efforts to stay proficient and to not be distracted. I mean, the NTSB has talked about distractions as being one of the most common causes of loss of control accidents in particular. I think it's easy for us to be distracted in these times. And, if you haven't given it some thought, be careful when you go flying. It's easy to mess up in these crazy times that we're in right now.
But again, and it doesn't take long. Think about how many times you've just looked down to change a radio station in the car, and you think you only had your eyes down for a quarter of a second, and you look over and you're halfway in the next lane. So imagine in an airplane. But again, there's just so many things working on our brain right now that, anyway.
Well, so let's take a look at the next story, which coincidentally is also related to firearms. Why don't you read that for us and let me know if you think if forgetfulness is the reason this story happened.
U.S. Customs officers intercepted a Venezuelan-bound private jet in South Florida recently, and it was loaded with 82 firearms, including a sniper rifle and 63,000 rounds of ammunition. The 2 Venezuelan pilots, who we shall not mention the names of, were arrested and charged with smuggling bulk cash and goods from the U.S. and illegally possessing firearms as an alien. At least that's what the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol people said. Now, it wasn't clear why the weapons were purchased, but the arrest comes as tensions between the U.S. and Venezuela have escalated in recent months, including allegations that opponents of President Nicolas Maduro have been seeking the support of a former U.S. Green Beret to violently overthrow the socialist leader. The Venezuelan jet was registered in Venezuela, and it listed its destination in the St. Vincent and the Grenadines Isles in the Caribbean. A special agent with the Homeland Security said that from my training and experience, I know that pilots have filed flight plans to third-party countries to avoid detection of their ultimate destination, to avoid scrutiny of law enforcement authorities, he said. Now, the 2 pilots came under scrutiny before for smuggling of gold, cocaine, and other goods as the Trump administration has intensified efforts to isolate Maduro's government. Now, the one thing I find interesting here, it says that the customs agents were sort of alerted to the some suspicious activity of the aircraft while it was on the ground at Hollywood Fort Lauderdale Airport. They don't say exactly what it was that was suspicious, but that somehow as they opened up the airplane and and looked inside to see what was going on. They found box after box of weapons and ammunition, and let's see, there was also body armor on board. And the two pilots said that, hey, they bought all this stuff in Florida from either retail shops or through the internet. And so that's all we know about these two fellows. And where their guns and things were headed, we don't know. But maybe they forgot they'd loaded the 89 weapons and 63,000 rounds of ammunition into the airplane.
Must be. I mean, the stress of the pandemic has probably made them forget. Yeah, it's kind of interesting that apparently they were given this inspection, and before the inspection was about to happen, they were rapidly trying to unload 50 boxes from the jet, but I guess they didn't unload it in time before the customs inspectors showed up. Yeah, what's unusual to me about this story is we often read stories about aircraft that are being used for running drugs. I can't really remember a story about an aircraft being used to ship this many weapons unless it was some type of government-sponsored activity, and this certainly doesn't appear to be government-sponsored, but who knows who is funding these two lads and their flight to the South America?
Well, I think that's the question: is if it was, which government was funding it?
Exactly. Yeah. So there are all kinds of possibilities here. But would you think maybe there's a moral to this story that people can learn from this story?
Don't put guns on airplanes. Well, I guess the good news, though, let's be serious. Yeah. Nobody said any of these guns were loaded.
Right. Oh, yeah.
So there is a saving grace to this story, I think.
Oh, dear. Well, I'm glad you could find a silver lining in this one. But yeah, it's it's certainly unusual. And I said we often see stories of airplanes running drugs. Actually, we don't see that many of them. I probably run across one every 2 to 3 months, which I guess means most of those planes are getting through and we're not reading about them.
Well, I'll tell you a funny story. Years ago, when I was a controller down in, I used to be a controller at Opelika Airport, Oscar Papa Fox, which is now called something else, Opelika Regional or something. Yeah. But it was much busier then. But I remember one time a DC-3 came in and landed and taxied over to the ramp, maybe 100 yards from the customs building. Sun was setting, and they just said, we're headed there. And they some trucks pulled up and they started offloading cargo. And suddenly you couldn't miss it. There were flashing lights everywhere on the ramp down below. And come to find out that this Goonie bird was loaded with marijuana. And they just landed at Opelika and thought, well, the easiest way to get the stuff out of the Goonie bird is to have a couple of trucks nearby to put it in, and then we'll go take it away. And they did this 100 yards from the customs building, and then they were surprised they got caught. Go figure.
I just think these people were ahead of their time. If they just waited a few decades, it all would have been legal. All right. Well, let's move on here, and let me tell folks about how not to get the attention of fighter jets. This comes from pcdn.co. It says fighters used flares to get TFR busting pilots' attention. NORAD fighters fired flares to get the attention of an RV-7 pilot who blundered into the presidential TFR surrounding the president's Bedminster, New Jersey golf resort. The jets were scrambled and intercepted the home built in the restricted airspace, but weren't able to raise the pilot on the radio. Shortly after the flares were used, somehow this pilot found the correct frequency. Yeah, you have to get his attention first. And he was escorted to a nearby airport where his day undoubtedly got even worse. It's not clear if the president was even aware of the incident, but it definitely got the attention of the Secret Service. Quote, the president was not in danger and the security of the complex was maintained throughout. Further investigation of the airspace violation is pending, the Secret Service said in a statement. So I've got a question for you. When you're flying, what's the first indication to you that you've been intercepted by a jet?
I look out the window and I see a pair of F-16s, maybe one on each side. And at very worst, if you don't pay attention, one of them will cross your path a little faster, maybe a little higher than you, just to get your attention. And I think I would question that if the pilots on these fighters had to fire flares to get this person's attention, I'm thinking, yeah, what's this pilot's eyesight like?
That's exactly what I was thinking. I think the Secret Service should immediately refer him for a vision test. I mean, it's like, how could you not miss being intercepted? And this is, to me, what's totally unusual about this story. Many pilots violate TFRs. Many pilots get escorted outside of restricted airspace in TFRs. This is the first time I've heard of them having to fire flares, get the attention of a pilot.
Okay, to be honest, we do not know if it was dark. There's always the possibility it was dark. And, it's hard to see those TFR airspace restrictions in the dark. So he may have missed it.
Yep, apparently so. Well, let's talk about standard interception procedures then. They vary ever so slightly in the day versus night. In the daytime, if you look out the left side and you see a jet just slightly ahead and to the left, and he's rocking his wings, that means I am intercepting you. And your response as a pilot, after you clean up the cockpit, is to rock your wings in acknowledgement, which says, yes, I understand. You are the boss. I will do whatever you want. And then
contrary to popular belief, it doesn't mean rock your wings to say hi. I really think you've got a cool airplane.
Yeah,
there.
Exactly. Now, so you need to then follow that aircraft, and they will lead you outside of the restricted area. And then when they are done with you, they will make a sharp 90-degree turn, I believe, to the left to break off. And now you are allowed to continue on your way. Now, at nighttime, everything is the same, except that aircraft that's intercepting you off to the left will be irregularly flashing their nav lights. And you were supposed to do the same thing, just kind of jiggle your lights back and forth to kind of let them know, hey, yes, I acknowledge I'm being intercepted. You are the superior power, and I will do whatever you want. And of course, you mentioned two airplanes. One jet is off on your left side, and that's the one that you can see. It's kind of like an illusionist where they've got two hands and you can't see what the other hand is doing. Where's the second fighter jet?
Probably behind.
On your 6 o'clock, where if you do anything wrong, he's going to do what?
Probably going to keep you from flying ever again.
Exactly. He will be on the trigger switch. So yeah, when you see one jet intercepting you, you only see half the equation. So hopefully we won't see more of these. Any other thoughts on interceptions, by the way?
Your comment about his day undoubtedly got worse. Oh yeah. It's not a good thing to bust a TFR, and they don't look kindly on that.
By the way, have you ever seen a jet firing flares?
No, have you?
Well, so let me tell you about when I was intercepted. No, I'm kidding. I've never been intercepted. I was bringing a Cirrus back across the country about a year ago from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast. Someone had just purchased a new aircraft, and we were flying along by Pensacola, and off the left wing was the Gulf of Mexico, and we could hear lots of traffic on ATC. They were talking to a number of aircraft that were maneuvering out there. It was night, by the way. And the pilot who was flying the aircraft said to me, hey, look, they're shooting flares off there. Now, it turns out he was a former Army helicopter pilot. So he knew what this stuff was. And I looked out there and they were probably, I'm guessing at least 4, 5, 6 miles away, maybe farther. And yeah, you could see lots and lots and lots of fireworks moving kind of in all directions. It's kind of like it was emanating, up, down, sideways from this aircraft. It was quite a light show. So I was pretty impressed.
As long as you're not seeing tracers across your path or anything like that, sure.
Well, let's talk about other kinds of stupid pilot tricks. Tell us about this next story here.
Oh, stupid pilot tricks. You make it sound like sometimes pilots are paying attention. In this particular case, the pilot and a passenger departed from an airport, Falcon, Colorado, where the density altitude was 9,500 feet, which is that's the tip off. That's when the instructor says, "Gee, Max, if you take off at an altitude of or an airport with a 9,500 foot density altitude, what does that mean to you?" And you're supposed to say, "Oh, it means the airplane's probably not going to perform that well.
It's going to have a hard time climbing." Yes.
That's right. And to make things even more interesting, during the takeoff engine run-up, the pilot noticed that the engine was not operating correctly on one of the mags. They went back to the ramp, and the mechanic said, "Oh, the left magneto's inoperative," and then disconnected both of the leads from the mag. Now, the pilot's second and third engine, this is the part I don't quite understand, why he'd be doing run-ups with one mag that he already knows is not operating, but he managed to get full power. I have a problem understanding that.
Not possible. Not possible.
Yeah. And best of all, the pilot took off from Falcon Airport in Colorado at a density altitude of 9,500 feet. Oh, and I forgot to mention this was a Cherokee 6, sort of that stretch Cherokee they used to make years ago. And believe it or not, the airplane didn't want to climb.
Really?
It just got to the end of the runway, and it just stalled and hit the ground. And when they pulled the engine apart later, the mag was definitely dead, and no one can quite figure out why the pilot made the decision to depart from a high altitude airport with an inoperative magneto. And it didn't cross his mind that even with both magnetos running, that this might be a particularly awkward takeoff. And we don't even know what the outside air temperature was at the time. So this goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Is somebody not paying attention, or is this a case of someone that should have their pilot's certificate scanned to make sure that it's real? Because this makes you think this person really shouldn't be in an airplane flying above other people.
I wonder if this is a case of wishful thinking. I think humans as a species are optimists, and I think pilots sometimes are kind of mission driven where, hey, this is my plan to go from point A and land at point B, and I'll be darned if anything's going to slow me down and stop me. And that kind of drive may work well for people in the business world, make them incredibly successful. I don't think people always realize when they apply those same techniques to aviation that they don't always get the same results, because the laws of physics don't really care who you are. I think that people probably don't understand magnetos as well as they could. I did a show here on Aviation News Talk a while back where we talked in detail about magnetos. And certainly as a private pilot, long before I became a CFI, I didn't fully understand, well, do we have two of them? And, what happens if one of them doesn't work? Can we, still fly? And it looks like it still puts out power. But there's a whole lot of stuff that goes on there. If one mag is not working, you're not going to get as much power. And you see that anytime you do a mag check. I mean, that shows you right there. You got to drop an RPM. Hey, that's the loss of power that you get if one magneto is not working. And your engine's going to run hotter, because when you have two mags working, all the spark plugs are firing. If one mag isn't working, only half of the spark plugs are firing. And so you get a much more even burn of the fuel across the cylinder, and you more completely combust the fuel that's there. So you definitely get more power, and your engine runs cooler. But I'm not sure that those are the kinds of things that people think about when they're driven to get from point A to point B.
So you think that this pilot could have been an optimist pilot, thinking that there was probably a way that this could work for him because the laws of physics don't apply if you're a very successful business person.
Yeah, exactly. The irony of doing a power check with one mag is that there is actually no way to verify how much power you get, because when we do a mag check, we turn off one mag. He only had one left to turn off. So when he did his mag check, that would turn off all power of the engine. So of course, with one dead mag, you can't see the difference between full power and partial power. You only see the difference between partial power and no power. So I think this gentleman didn't really understand how the mags work in an airplane, because to contend that he got full power is to point out that he lacked knowledge about how these things actually work. It's not possible to get full power with one dead magneto.
Yeah, and now, of course, they didn't tell us what happened to the pilot and passenger. We don't know if they survived this accident or not.
I think they did, because they said he chose to land in a field adjacent to the airport. The airplane stalled just above the ground and then hit the ground. So
you're right. I completely missed that because I wasn't paying attention. But you know what's really scary is that when people listen to things like this, they go, "Oh, what a silly story. I can't believe these guys are even talking about this kind of thing."
Yeah.
Well, there's a reason we're talking about it, because somebody did it.
Yep. And, if you think about it in pilot training, how much time do they really spend talking about the magnetos? All you really kind of know is, the spark comes out of it, and, hey, you got to do this mag check. And that's about it. I think people just don't know as much about this system as they should.
And usually they learn when they're doing the ground check. And have you ever had a student kind of get out of sequence and they go, let's check the other side, and the engine goes.
Absolutely.
Oh, wait, I went to none.
Yes.
And you don't want to do that.
No,
it's
not great for the engine. And yes, I'm sure I've done that myself, not just students. So yeah, it's easy to do.
But next, of course, we have a warm, fuzzy, emotional story coming up, don't we?
Oh, this was just an amazing story. This was in generalaviationnews.com, and a gentleman wrote about a scenario that occurred in which the pilot he calls Bob came over to meet him at his hangar, one Saturday morning, and he talks about how it was VFR, the ceiling was at least 1,000 feet above the traffic pattern altitude. Bob came and landed at this non-towered airport, and he chose a right base entry to a particular airport. And then shortly after he landed and came over to the hangar to talk with the author, one of the airport ops people, sounds like who also was a fuel guy, came over as he's been instructed to let Bob know that, hey, guess what? You're actually supposed to fly left traffic at this airport. Even showed him the particular regulation, had a little sheet of paper to hand out to him, undoubtedly prepared by airport management. And, most pilots would kind of go, oh, thank you very much. Gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that. I'll remember that next time. This pilot, and by the way, the title of this story was Sometimes We're Wrong. This pilot apparently, absolutely ripped this poor young lineman to shreds, telling him that, he was in the right, and that this poor lineman shouldn't be doing his job, informing him of what he had done. And the author goes on to write that his opinion of the lineman, who he had known before and thought extremely highly of, went up considerably, and that his opinion of his friend kind of went down, quite a bit. And what he really says at the end is that, we're all wrong some of the time, and that the way we, learn is by looking at the regulations. He said, we don't want to just take the opinion of, our favorite CFI or our another pilot we talked to on Facebook. We want to look at the charts. We want to look at the regulations. We want to look at the data. And that's how we know what's right or what's wrong. And yes, sometimes we're all wrong. I mean, it just happens. And in aviation, it's so incredibly important to just admit that you're wrong, because we're all wrong some of the time. Because if you try and maintain this, illusion that you're perfect, how are you going to learn? And to treat someone poorly like that, that's just not cool. So interesting story.
Not to mention, of course, the fact that if this particular pilot enters a traffic pattern at a non-controlled field any way they want, it's not a very safe operation, and it is likely to cost someone else their life one day, and it's our job to constantly learn, as you said. But then, as we know, there are people who have attitudes that are, well, they're not really that conducive to safe flying. And I think we've all known people like that. And I know someone who has a very high-powered single-engine airplane. And people told me when he got this new airplane, you don't want to fly with him. I said, oh, really? No, you don't want to do that. He's had a few accidents already in the past based on poor judgment, running out of fuel, and a few other things. And I said, well, gee, thanks very much for telling me about that. The trouble is that somebody will fly with it.
Sure, somebody won't know.
And or the fact that they may just go out by themselves. And I again, if they have a death wish, well, that's up to them. But it's sad when they take somebody else with them.
And the way this article ends up, I really like. The author says, what we believe is immaterial. How we feel is irrelevant. There is a document, a reference, a resource that holds the answer to our question, and it isn't found in some CFI's best guess or your hangar mate's memory. The correct answer is written down, codified, cataloged, and publicly available at no cost to us, the users. And then he says, don't be Bob. We're better than that, or we should be, and we can be if we open our eyes and ears and recognize the simple truth that sometimes we're wrong, all of us. So great story. I think it was incredibly well written, and I love the end of it. Don't be Bob. Don't be that pilot. Just don't start ripping to someone else just to try and, make it look like you're right. When you're wrong, you're wrong. Admit it and learn from it.
Well, especially because most of the time when this kind of thing happens, everyone else knows you got it wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not as if someone said, "Oh, I watched. I thought he made left traffic." Nah, you just suck it up and go, "Oh man, I screwed up."
Yeah.
And that feeling of embarrassment alone is usually enough to make most people say, "Wow, I've got to really check that stuff closer next time before I fly into an uncontrolled field or something similar." But again, there are always those folks that are on another planet.
Yeah, and I think what you're describing is the approach of a mature pilot, a safe pilot, one who wants to be professional in their approach to flying. And even if you are a hobbyist pilot, someone who just recreationally flies for fun, you still want to take a professional attitude. You still want to try and do it as correctly as possible. And you don't want to be on your high horse and start ripping people up for no good reason. Nobody likes that.
No, not at all.
Well, sir, thanks so much for helping me get through these stories of the weird.
Oh, we're not done already.
Oh, you know what? We got to save some for next time.
Okay. I still think you need a voice in there to lead into this that says, stories of the weird, something like that. But
I have one now. I've recorded that. That's what we.
Oh, that's good. And you need to put the filter on so the guy sounds like this. Or it sounds like this. Stories of the weird.
And Rob, that's why I enjoy having you so much here, because you've got the best voices,
Well, that was always the fun part when we were doing Airplane Geeks together. Is I remember the one who used to mention it a lot was Dan Webbage, and he'd say, the outtakes from this show are just going to be great. And the stories are good, but the outtakes are going to be really fun.
Exactly,
and especially when you're not even trying.
Well, sir, let's continue to have some fun, keep it light during these times of COVID. In the meantime, where do people find out more about you and your work?
Well, they can find me within the pages of Flying Magazine, at least until this hits. And then who knows? I may be out of work. No, I don't think I said anything bad. But so that's flyingmag.com or at jetwine.com, which is where Scott Spangler and I write a blog that has been going for, these many years, from back when I was just a mere lad in the aviation industry.
Rob, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting me, Max, and I hope you all, everybody out there, fly safely.
Well, my thanks to Rob Mark. Rob is just incredibly knowledgeable about aviation, and he's a great guy to boot, so I encourage you to follow his work. I've included links in the show notes to his jetwine.com blog and to Flying Magazine where he works. And of course, we'll have him back here again soon for more aviation
stories of the...
And hey, did you know that we lose about a half a dozen Patreon supporters every month because their credit cards expire, but they just never update them? And that's why we're constantly looking for new supporters like you to step up and support the show, just to stay even, much less to grow the support. And when you donate, I will read your name on the show. And just imagine, your name will be heard by thousands of listeners in over 140 countries around the world. And yes, we have listeners in places like China, Greece, and even Nepal. Depending upon what level you sign up at, you may receive the scripts to our news shows, links to the many news stories we've had to cut for time, and early access to some shows. For example, Patreon supporters at the $20 and up level receive some of the shows 2 days earlier than everyone else. If you'd like to receive all those goodies, then you can sign up through Patreon to make a monthly donation. To do that, go to aviationnewstalk.com/awesome, because you're awesome supporters, and enter your credit card information. You can also support the show through PayPal, and their system gives you a choice of either donating monthly or you can make a one-time lump sum donation. Now, if you sign up via PayPal, I don't have a way to get the show notes to you, but you'll still get the free online courses and books that I offer at the $35 and $50 a month levels. And to donate via PayPal, go to aviationnewstalk.com/PayPal. And thank you so much for your support. And finally, please tell all of your friends about the Aviation News Talk podcast. And if, they're one of those folks that just still doesn't know what a podcast is, it's easy. Just send them out to the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store, where they can download our dedicated app for free. Just have them search in the store for Aviation News Talk. So until next time, fly safely, have fun, and keep the blue side up.